Hello and welcome to another Play Better Chess video. So today, what chess tactics do the best players use? To give you some examples, I have a game here from Bobby Fischer, one of the greatest players of all time, a former world chess champion from 1972 to 75. And this game is from 1971. And it's a world championship candidates match. And Fischer's playing one of the best players of that time, Bent Larsen. Even though his rating here is 2660 and Fischer's is 2760, 100 points higher, Fischer was just playing, at the best that he's ever played in his career, leading up to him winning the World Chess Championship. And some people say that after this match, Bent Larsen, lost this match, and it kind of led to his career going downhill after that. So let's see what tactics the best players use. I'll run this through a game review here, and we can see what accuracy percentage of the players played at. Fischer played at 92.8% accuracy, and his opponent, Bent Larsen, played at 88.6%. So, high 80s, not bad, but even better for Fischer. And they both had one brilliant move and 7 great moves. And then as far as bad moves, Fischer had 1 inaccuracy. His opponent had 5. And then, let's see, mistakes. They both had 2 mistakes. Fischer had 1 miss, but his opponent had 1 blunder. And it looks like Fischer played at a 2800 level versus 2550 by his opponent. And if you want to dig deeper, you can see that Fischer played 100% opening accuracy, and so did his opponent. But the middle game, Fischer played 90.7, and his opponent played even better, 91.3. But then in the end game, 92.8% accuracy for Fischer versus 80.3. So Fischer outplayed his opponent in the end game. All right, back to tactics. Tactics is one of the best ways to improve your chess quickly. The better you are at tactics, the more you can attack your opponent, the more you can recognize tactics, defend against them. So in this game, let me turn on the computer analysis here. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I want. Analysis. All right. Why is the computer not on? Here we go. All right. Now, Fischer begins with e4, and Fischer was known to say that e4 is best by test because he really loved playing this e4 pawn push. The games usually open up more, and it allows you to attack a little bit more. You have more room for your pieces. So Bent Larsen plays e6 here, the French defense, which is usually a little more closed and positional. So let's see what happens. Now, with the French defense, because you're playing e6, you do not have a pawn here on e5 that can attack this pawn. So why not put both of your pawns in the center? Because then you're controlling a lot of valuable territory with both of these pawns. All of these squares here are covered by the pawns, and the center part of the board is very important, as I've mentioned in other videos, because if you control the center, it's easier to control the flow of the game and allow your pieces to travel to the center and through the center to any other part of the board. All right, here we go. The response, d5. So if you allow your opponent to take too much control of the center, they can overrun your position. So in the French defense, you play this e6 move in order to cover the pawn on d5, which fights for the center by attacking the e4 pawn. So Fischer just defends the pawn, and now we have the first tactic of the game. And, this is just a basic tactical move, the pin, the common pin. But, I should highlight this because pins happen so often in games, and they're a very important part of chess. Basic stuff here, but for you beginners, the knight is pinned to the king, so it'd be illegal to move that. And because the knight is defending this pawn here, and the knight cannot move, there's a threat of just capturing the pawn. So what does Fischer do? He pushes the pawn forward to get rid of that threat. This gains space in the center, and it also prevents the knight from jumping to this f6 square. All right, so the game continues with the knight moving to e7, of course, because it can't go here. And now black is ready to castle to safety if he chooses to do that. And Fischer, he attacks immediately. And so that is kind of a strategy and a tactic at the same time. If you can attack your opponent's pieces and gain time on them. Now, if this piece retreated, then that may allow Fischer to attack it again or even develop another piece. So in order to not lose time and allow Fischer to develop while his opponent retreats, Bent Larsen just captures the knight. And we have a recapture. So another strategy that's related to a tactic, you capture the piece here, and that's something to look at. If, let's say the queen was maybe here backing this bishop up, well then you have possibilities. Or if the pawn was not even here to begin with, this is another common tactic, where you're forking two pieces. Now, of course, this pawn is in the way, so that is not a fork unless you count the king and the pawn being forked. But anyway, back to the game. We have a capture, and then we have c5. Another strategy here. And you'll notice that tactics and strategy go hand in hand. If you play good strategic moves in your games, it kind of helps you build up to a point where tactics become possible. So here, the threat is just to capture this, and then you would recapture. But you use a flank pawn to capture a more valuable central pawn. So that's another strategy that you can use. But getting back to the game, here we go. a4, gaining space on the queen side by Fischer. And now the strategy or tactic, kind of both, of adding more pressure to an attacked piece. So now we have pawn attacking along with a knight. So here we just have a simple tactic of two attackers versus one defender. So you notice how the best players in the world are so good at using the basics. So basic tactics are used to dictate the flow of the game, in combination with whatever strategy they're trying to use in the game. So the knight develops to f3, adding a defender to protect the pawn. And common development, bishop just develops off the back rank. And now we have this bishop to d3 move here. Just centralizing the bishop. The computer says this is an inaccuracy because it's possible to just push this pawn, attack the bishop, and send the bishop retreating, losing time, allowing Larsen to make a move. And instead of doing that immediately, or playing the best move, which is this, which would be another pin of this pawn, which is helping defend this pawn. So that would have been another possible tactic. Put the queen here, lining up on the king, pinning this pawn, and taking away a defender of this pawn on d4. But in the game, we had queen to c7, a inaccuracy played by Bent Larsen, and now Fischer is ahead by 0.8, almost the equivalent of a pawn here. So what does he do? He just goes ahead and castles, which is an excellent move, although the computer prefers an immediate bishop to a3, just attacking this pawn here. So we have finally that pawn push, although the computer recommends playing h6 here instead, pushing this pawn and maybe keeping the knight from being able to develop here. And there's also a tactic of, if we had castling to the king side by black, there is a threat of sacrificing this bishop, and then if the king were to capture, the knight could jump up with check. The queen could try and jump into the action here and cause, some threats with a good attack on the king side here. So, that's probably another reason that this move was played, attacking the bishop and getting it out of the line here, this diagonal aimed at the king side. So the bishop retreats, and now we have an attack on this pawn chain. So when you're attacking a pawn chain, it's usually best to attack the base of the chain, but you would have to bring this pawn to here and then move here, and this pawn is stopping that for the moment. So the next best thing to do is attack the head of the pawn chain. So you attack the top of the pawn chain here. And what does Fischer do? He ignores that in favor of development. And this could be called a tactic, or maybe a strategy, kind of both, where you line up on the king. Even though there are a bishop, 2 pawns, a knight, all these pieces are in between, you never know what might happen if the position opens up all of a sudden and pieces clear out of the way. And then next thing you know, the king could be under attack. So we have a mistake played by Larsen here. Apparently it would have been better to castle immediately. And so what does Fischer do? Does he take advantage of the mistake? Yes. He plays this bishop to a3 move, preventing the king now from castling to safety and bringing the rook here where it can attack down, especially if these pawns trade. There could be a half open file for that rook to operate on. So capture, pawn recaptures. Now apparently it would have been better to capture with the knight, but that would just trade off more pieces, and Fischer is going to go behind here because he has 2 attackers, 3 actually, with the queen all piling up on this pawn, and only 1 defender at the moment. If the bishop moves, the rook could defend, but still that's 3 attackers versus 1 defender at the moment. So that's another strategy, maybe a tactic. It could be a little bit of both, where you attack a vulnerability, whether it's a piece or a pawn or the king, and you just start adding pressure, get more pieces into the attack. So we have capture, an inaccuracy. Apparently it would have been better to bring the other knight in, maybe because this knight here is controlling the center more. So, a good strategy is to bring the knight in that is more off to the edge of the board where it's not controlling as much of the center. But the knight captures. We have a recapture, which is best, and the knight captures. And now, what does Fischer play here? He centralizes his queen. So, a good little tactic here of just attacking a piece, but it is defended by the queen. But at some point, if maybe this bishop moves, it would just pile up on this knight that only has 1 defender. And also this helps bring the queen into the center where it radiates more power all over the board here. In the center, this queen is just covering in so many directions here. So if you can centralize your queen, that's usually a good little strategy, or a tactic if you can attack something while you're centralizing your queen. So Larsen, he doesn't want to deal with that, any future threats, especially if the rook piles up, so he just retreats back, the best move. And now we have another pin. So Fischer using basic tactics here to dictate the flow of the game. So he's pinning this. The threat might be to just capture and wreck these pawns, doubling them up. And also, now this pawn is under attack as well. So, maybe the threat of capturing the knight, then picking this pawn off and threatening the rook. So what does his opponent do? He moves the king to f7, an inaccuracy. So he's protecting this pawn. He's also protecting the knight. Maybe if he doesn't want to double pawns up. But I don't know. The king is starting to get a little bit exposed here. It looks like just a6 would have been better here. Or maybe even castling queenside. So king moves, and now f4, gaining space on the king side, and a threat possibly of pushing forward here. And as I mentioned, the best way to attack a pawn chain, so this chain of pawns here, the best way to attack it is to attack the base of the pawn chain. So if this pawn pushes forward, it can attack the base of the chain. Now the pawn could capture, but then Fischer would be able to capture the next pawn at the base of this new chain of two pawns with check on the king. So let's see what happens here. The rook adds to the defense of this pawn, kind of lines up on Fischer's rook as well on e1 here, and the game continues with f5. A great move by Fischer. He just continues with his plan of attacking the base of the chain. So capture is best, but now this allows Fischer to capture this pawn with a check. And look at this. So we have an attack on the king. The bishop is controlling this diagonal. And so, because the queen is attacking here, the king cannot retreat to this square. And what can he do here? He's just forced to push forward and become more vulnerable as he is forced up the board towards the enemy. All right, so Fischer commits a mistake here, retreating back to f3, maybe using the tactic of creating a battery of two pieces working together to attack here. So now there are two attackers and only one defender of this pawn. But apparently that's not the best move. Bishop to d6 would have been better. So the computer likes this, attacking the queen here, centralizing the bishop, and what does it say should happen after bishop to d6? The queen should just retreat up to c8 over here. But in the game, we had bishop retreat, attacking the pawn. So now knight jumps forward, blocking the scope of the rook here, attacking the bishop. So what does Fischer do? He drops back, and we have another pin. So apparently Fischer loves to pin pieces, at least he does in this game. So he's gone ahead and used the pin quite often in this game. He's pinning the knight to the king. Now the knight cannot capture this bishop with check. So the game continues with the king breaking out of that pin. And at this point, apparently the game is dead even. So we have an even game here according to the computer. And what does Fischer do next? Well, he goes ahead and sacrifices the rook here for the knight. So queen captures, which is best. And even though Fischer is behind in material here by +3 at the moment, it looks like the game is still dead even. So capture, now the game is evened up. And so let's look at this. Material is even, but Fischer has 2 bishops. He has the bishop pair for one of these rooks. So how does the game continue? Well, we have an attack on the queen, which forces the queen off of this valuable open file. So Fischer captures a pawn, going ahead in material here. And now queen delivers a check here. And so here we have a fork, attacking the king and the pawn here. So you have to watch out when it comes to tactics whenever there are queens on the board and your king is somewhat open. Or if your king is way out in the open, then you definitely have to really keep an eye on all the forking possibilities that a queen could deliver here, just like this one. So Fischer plays a great move, moving towards the center. Some players, especially beginners, might be scared and run into the corner, but if you run into the corner here, that would be a huge mistake, because then you could sacrifice the queen, the rook would capture, and then this rook would capture, delivering a back rank mate. So a lot of times with the best players in the world, or even chess masters in general, there are a lot of threats of tactics. There are tactical possibilities, but these players are so good that they see a lot of them coming, most of them coming, and they avoid them before they happen, like this threat here. So Fischer knew that if he went into the corner, the queen could sacrifice itself for the rook, and then the other rook would capture with a back rank mate tactic. So definitely a good tactic to know, the back rank mate. All right, what happened next? So Fischer moves to the center of the board, which is a good strategy into the end game. You want to get your king out into the action, but that's usually pretty dangerous when queens are still on the board. And here, putting the rook on the 7th rank, another good strategy or tactic. It's kind of a little bit of both. There's a tactical threat here of delivering mate in 1. So Larsson is attacking Fischer pretty good here, but whenever there are queens on the board and checking possibilities, you have to watch out. It can turn the tide of the game. And with this move, the game is equal. So attacking the king and the rook blocks here, a great move. The game is still, absolutely even though Fischer is ahead by a pawn. And now the bishop jumps into action here, attacking the queen. So now we have the rook delivering a check, leaving the queen under attack here. So what does Fischer do? He moves to g1, forced into the, towards the edge of the board here. And now this would be very dangerous with a possibility of a discovered check tactic. This rook could move away, maybe capturing this pawn with a discovered check if it were not for this bishop that would be able to capture here. So how does the game continue? Larsson captures here. So a brilliant move by Larsson. he captures with a discovered check anyway. So this looks pretty crazy, but the king is under attack and has to deal with this. So, he captures the rook. The best move for Fischer, and at the moment, Fischer is ahead by +5, but that's about to change because after the queen check, another fork here of pawn and king. The king moves down into the corner, and now we have a capture of the queen. So crazy tactics happening in this game. What do we have in this position? It looks really unbalanced, and that's another good strategy or tactic that you can use is to unbalance the position, because a lot of times it's harder to play these very unbalanced positions. And when I mean unbalanced, I mean a material imbalance, I guess. So here we have two bishops for the rook here, and then we have a queen for the rook. So if we add up material, at the moment we have +4 for Larsen, but with Fischer to move, he captures the rook. And now Fischer is ahead by +1. So can the queen handle a rook and the bishop pair? It's pretty crazy here. So let's see what happens. We have a capture and an attack. And this happens to be a fork, so the fork tactic of attacking two pieces here, a pawn and a piece. What is played in the game? Well, a great move by Fischer. He plays rook to g1 with check, so the king runs towards the center, but apparently king to h5 would have been better. Moving up closer towards the king, maybe bringing his pawns up with him at some point. Let's see what happens next. So pawn captures. Now Fischer's ahead by 1 in material. And this is an inaccuracy. g5 would have been better. And so now we have the bishop to b6, a mistake by Fischer. Apparently pushing this pawn immediately is considered best. So, no wonder Fischer didn't find that move. a5, we could take a look at this. So if the pawn pushes forward, the queen would capture the pawn, and then you have bishop to d4 check, king to e6, and then the bishop can capture this pawn. So apparently the computer likes that better. And if we look at that tactic, this is an interesting tactic where you attack the more powerful piece in front, but you're lining up on the piece behind it. Now here, I guess even if the king would have gone here, the rook is piled up on this pawn as well. So, excuse me. So here, if the king moves to e6, then you just pick this off with rook or bishop here. Anyway, back to the game. Let's wrap this up. Bishop moved up to b6, and why was this played? To help escort this pawn up to the promotion square. So the queen attacks the pawn, and the pawn moves forward. And now, also the queen moved to this light square diagonal with maybe the possibility, if this bishop moves off of the diagonal, then the queen could start harassing the king here. All right. An attack on the unprotected bishop. The bishop retreats with check. So as the king moves toward the action here, the pawn just presses forward. And the game continues with queen to a3. And this was probably the game-losing mistake here. Queen to f2. Apparently that would have been better. Queen to f2, and then what? They recommend bishop to h4. Huh. I guess if you played bishop to h4 and the queen attacked, then it would take the queen away from guarding this square and allow the pawn to just promote. So, that's another tactic where you kind of overload a piece or distract it, decoy the piece away. So if the bishop goes here and the queen captures, well, it would no longer be guarding this promotion path of the pawn, and it could just move forward and promote. All right, let's see what happened in the game. We had queen to a3, and now the pawn moves up here to, or excuse me, the bishop moves to protect the pawn on b7, but this is a missed opportunity. Apparently rook to e1 would have been better. So with that move, rook to e1 is best, and it looks like, if you play king to d6, it leads to a mate, apparently. They recommend king to f5 or king to f7. But at that point, black would just be losing. Okay, so what happened in the game? The queen moves here to control this square, preventing the pawn from pushing forward. But now we have rook to b1 possible. What would have been best here? Apparently queen to b4. Okay, yeah, that makes a little more sense. Queen to b4 here, attacking the bishop. If the pawn moves forward, well then the bishop could be captured, and then it would guard the queening square if the queen is here. So, and, this could help push this pawn forward, and it would be protected by the queen and guard this square for promotion in the future. But it doesn't work. Fischer is just, having this pawn run away here. This is the best move. Why? Because after this, we have the bishop attacking the queen and protecting this square to allow the pawn to run forward to promotion. And this is where the game ended. So, what is a possibility if the game would have went on? Bent Larsen resigned here, but this apparently is the best move. And then rook to e1 check. Oh, that's tricky. That's the only move that works in this position. Rook to e1 check. And then what? Queen. No way. Queen to e5 is the best move here. Okay. Blocking. But now if the rook captures, the queen would be, or excuse me, the pawn would be able to promote to a queen with a check. So that is best. Oh, actually no, because it's a checking move. So the king, well, I guess the king would capture here because he's under check. And yes, then the pawn, well, there's no way to stop that pawn. So apparently G1. Oh man, yeah, this is a tricky continuation. Promotion, but then the pawn runs up and it promotes. We have queen to A3. Promotion. And then the best thing to do is capture here. But then after capture, Fischer would have two bishops and a pawn. So, how would the game continue? Apparently they like, let's see, maybe this move, king up to g2, h6, bishop up to c6. The pawns just start moving, bishop to d4, and this bishop pair would just wreak havoc on the opponent. Now, they recommend f3, just giving up the pawn, maybe e6. Oof. Or g5. Let's say they start moving these pawns. The king could go up to h3. Then you have what? f3. That doesn't look so good. Maybe h5. But these bishops would just cause all kinds of trouble. Alright, anyway, you get the picture. You could even try and sacrifice one of your bishops for a couple pawns. But with the bishops and the king, you should be able to knock this out. And then you would have to keep your dark squared bishop if you want to try and escort the pawn up here in the end game. If everything is traded off the board except one bishop, you have to keep the dark squared bishop to allow the pawn to move up here and promote. All right, anyway, feel free to leave any comments, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.